it started with one of the first treaties was the New York Treaty about 1516 that came in. That was one of the first treaties. But in every one of those treaties that they set up with the Indians, they put an inclusion in there saying this, that if you were to cooperate with us and be able to help us maintain the slavery system we set up in this country, you know, and we will reward you and compensate you. We'll give you clothing, we'll give you food, we'll give you weapons, you know, and we'll even call you civilized if you will help us maintain slavery. Every treaty contained a clause to help Indians to shut down black folk. Slavery could never have existed in this country and been maintained without the full participation of the American tribes. That's why they started calling them civilized, Rock, because they began to say, you quit hunting in the woods and running wild and get yourself some land and get yourself some slaves. So Indians became slave hunters, slave traders, and in the final analysis, all civilized tribes, the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee, and Seminole Indians, they all fought with the South to maintain slavery. And so therefore, and they got benefits from it. And that led to, going back to the earlier question you asked me about reparations. And even after the Civil War ended, the Choctaw and Chickasaw were still holding about 12 or 15,000 slaves even after the Civil War ended. The United States government sent in troops saying, you got to get rid of this slavery and set black folk free. And they set up what's called the 1866 Indian Treaties with these 5 civilized tribes, which says that black people in this country must not only turn them loose, they must get benefits. They must get forms of reparations, going back to your earlier question. You must first of all, set them free. 2, you must give them an option, and this is for all black freedmen and all blacks who lived in the Indian Territory and all black Indians. You must set them free, allow them to have membership in the tribe. You must give them, let them have access to all the resources on the reservation. You must let them also be tax exempt. You must let them have free education. You must also let them be able to give them $150 in cash. You must give them 160 acres of land. And in present day times, those black Indians under the 1866 treaty should be getting, they could also hold gambling casinos. Now, this country has never carried out the full mandates, but yet we're still honoring it for Indians. Right now, all the benefits that Indians are getting in this country are getting it from the 1866 Indian Treaty, because they took up arms against the United States in the Civil War. They wiped out all previous treaties. Now, every year in the White House, we get about 560-some white Indian chiefs, which in history they call $5 Indians, because 90% of the people call themselves Indians nowadays are not really Indians. Those are whites passing as Indians, because they paid $5 to the Dawes Commission to get their name on the Dawes roll so they can get all these advantages. But every year they get invited to the White House. And every year they got an approximate $3.5 billion every year, even that Obama's been in office. They got money into the Federal Indian Bureau. Now, see, if you were to talk about reparations, black folks have been getting all this money all these years too. But they got shut out because the Indians in 1938, they sent a letter to the Department of Bureau of Indian Affairs saying, how do we shut black folk down to make sure they never get any reparations? And that letter floated around in the federal government from about 1938 to about 1941. Then it went to the Secretary for the Department of Interior. And the Department of Interior looked and says, said, how do I come up with a scheme to shut down blacks so they get no reparations in this country? He said, what you do, you Indians come up with a new concept called the quantum blood law, which says that black folk are not entitled to any of the benefits of the 1866 treaty in terms of reparations unless they can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that they got 1/4 Indian blood in them. And we make Indian blood sacred like Jesus Christ's blood. And therefore, they've been shutting blacks out all these years. That's why they didn't get any reparations, to go back to your earlier point. And the last point on reparations, you asked me earlier about a blueprint. This country's always given reparations to all groups except black folk, even though black folk were the ones who built the country. They built the bridges, they picked the cotton, they built the highways, they built the government buildings. They were the backbone of this nation. But now, so in the Marshall Plan, we gave billions of dollars to Germans after World War II. We gave under what's called a Point 4 program. We gave reparations to Japanese. We gave reparations to American Indians. We gave reparations to everybody but black folk. Yet black folk are locked into the bottom of a vertical order and a descending order of wealth, owning, and poverty. And control of resources. And nobody. It started with one of the first treaties was the New York Treaty about 1516 that came in. That was one of the first treaties. But in
I'm Dr. Claude Anderson, your host. I'm here to bring you a section of broadcasting or podcasting. It's now called Connecting the Dots, which means we try to take what's going on presently and connect it to history so you can find out what was in the center that's missing that nobody wants to talk about. That's why they're right now saying we don't need no racial history in this country. We're for right and trying to pass laws that's forbidden to teach history. Because what they want to do is to make sure that nobody ever finds out why blacks are in a dilemma in this country and any place on the world, including Haiti and all these Caribbean islands. It defies mathematical probability for black folk to be on the bottom all around the world and to have been there for 465 years. That's no accident. Black folk have never been permitted to be any more or any less than what white folk wanted them to be. You see, the whole point of history was that when white Europeans came to this country, they came here as freeloaders. And see, when you all don't call them that, that's exactly what they are. They knew they were coming as freeloaders, but they entered out all the prisons, all the poorhouses, all the mental institutions, and put them on boats and sent them over to the United States. And the first thing they did was build form a new state called Georgia, and to build a filter to stop slaves from running away from South Carolina into Florida. But that whole thing was built and designed to keep black folk contained. And the reason they don't try to do that, because you see, because black slaves were I call native blacks, because they're not African blacks, they're natives. These blacks are born in the United States, are born on ships after they were kidnapped out of Africa. So they're not Africans. They were raised totally independently, either on those boats or and after they arrived in America for the last 400 some years. They are natives. Plus, in addition to that, we had blacks in this country as Folsom people way before the American Indians ever came to this country, were ever formed, and came out of Asia across the Bering Straits. And so the Indians trying to get ahead of blacks by saying, we are natives. You're not any natives either. You came across the Bering Straits after blacks. That everybody on the earth came to the earth and followed black folk. The only natives you got on the earth are black people. They were the original natives. Everybody else came here. They were followers. They came here and were raised in either in Asia or European, on the European continent, or in the Pacific Islanders as freeloaders. They got some of the free benefits of what the historical blacks were creating on the earth. Blacks were the original people on the earth. And so what do you call them? Native Americans or original people? That's what blacks are entitled to, which makes them very special people. And so right now, we need to do something about these blacks with the present administration. See, Biden got elected with he and Harris running as vice president because they promised they're going to do certain things for black folk. They've been in there now over about a year and almost a year and a half, and they have not done one single thing for black folk. I don't think the word black has ever crossed their lips since they got elected. But now, when it was time for the vote to go out, they put up a pretense, a straw man talking about, we got to get the black vote because that black vote is exempt. We need to have that to get elected. First of all, they didn't need the black vote because you see, black folk were outnumbered 9-1 in this country. You got 9 other ethnic groups in the country, and if you break it down to parts, black folk only constitute 1 out of the 9 or 10 groups in this country. So black vote is not that necessary. They did that because they're going to do what they call sneaky suppression of the black vote. They've been suppressing the black vote since the Constitution in 1789. And people are talking about, they're suppressing our vote. The Constitution suppressed your vote. Until you go back and deal with the Constitution and correct it, you're going to always be suppressed. And that's built into the Constitution, that black folk were to be suppressed. And even after the Civil War, they went back and suppressed you again in the second Constitution. You got 2 constitutions in the United States. You got the first one written by Thomas Jefferson, and back in 1789, and you got a second Constitution that was written in 1865. It was written strictly and solely for black folk. Later on, they changed it from being a second Constitution because they didn't want you to know about it. And in there, that's where all your civil rights acts came out of, because the whole point of the civil rights movement was supposed to be to correct the Dred Scott decision of 1857, which says black people in America have no rights, and but you do have rights. You got a second constitution, which is starting with the 13th Amendment. The 13th, 14th, and the 15th Amendment are major elements in the second constitution. And on top of that, they put in what's called the Civil Rights Law that was passed in 1865 and 1866, which specifically identified black folk and said the whole point of these laws and the civil rights laws and those constitution amendments is to correct and reverse the 1857 Dred Scott decision. They're not there. They didn't put those laws up for minorities or poor folk. You didn't have the minorities and poor folk in America. All those people started coming to America after the Civil War was over. When they come in, they can come in here and they can get low wages and work on the railroads like the Chinese and all of them, but they were still safe. Nobody was denying them anything. They can have their own communities and have their own businesses and make money that way and be competitive with black folk. So Chinese, Asians came in here. They've been coming in ever since. And lately they've been bringing in either Pacific Islanders who've been doing very well because they're displacing black folk. You go to a hospital or for any kind of a medical treatment right now, about 90% of the medical people you're going to find in those various institutions and those organizations are going to be other people other than blacks or whites. They're going to be people coming in either from the Far East, from Asia, or coming in from the Pacific Islands. And so you find out another thing they're doing now. These Asians are coming into the country and raising Cain and trying to find bills that would say black folk are not entitled to preferential treatment in the university and admission processes in these universities. On set-asides for minorities. Black folk are not a minority. They are a majority. They've always been an exceptional majority. They're exceptional people. They're special people. They're entitled to special treatment that this country has never given them. And that's what black folks should be in the streets doing right now, is saying we are special, unique people. Nobody in this country, no ethnic group, religious group, cultural group has come here and suffered the way we have been denied all the rights and privileges that we've been denied. And they're coming and getting all the opportunities that we've been denied. So get out there and start doing it. Start raising Cain and says, we're going back to the Power Pack books that Dr. Anderson put out. Everything we need to know is in those Powernomics books. You can get those books by going to the website. Go to powernomics.com and get the Power Pack and start to reading the first one at the bottom of the pack, which is Black Labor, White Wealth. It'll take you straight up through 5 books, and there won't be one question that you can ask that should not have been answered by now and in those books. Get out there as soon as you can and order it off the website. And if you can't do that, just call the Powernomics Corporation and order it on the phone. I look forward to hearing from you. You take care and love, respect, and safe. Be safe in any regard other than that, and being endangered by what's going on overseas in Ukraine. Thank you. See you next time.
He is, whenever there's an important national convention or convening of people to talk about this subject, I never fail to find him on the program and enjoy him immensely. We welcome now Dr. Claude Anderson.
Thank you very much. And to my colleagues, let me say good afternoon to you and plus the members of the audience. According to John's letter, he indicated to me that he wants me to speak to develop a national plan. And John, that's what I'll try to do for you very quickly. But let me preface that by simply saying that if you hear about reparations, get this very firmly fixed in your mind. You're not here for a parlor discussion. It's not something to talk about that's nice. If you don't get reparations, black folk, you're through in this country. Let me be that very specific for you. You see, what's happening to black Americans is that black Americans have been systematically, socially engineered into the lowest level of a real-life monopoly game. You do not own and control a sufficient amount of anything to be competitive in America. And you've been marginalized now for 400 years. You're getting ready to be buried. You can get buried underneath a whole broad groups of ambiguous groupings. That's everything from culture groups, language groups, and gender groups. You're going down. It's no longer an issue. You better get reparations and get it fast. Now, to get reparations, one of the things I've been trying to do now for 30 years, beginning with the state of Florida, when Governor Rubin Askew put me over education, when they had no blacks in politics in Florida, was to write the first affirmative action plan in the United States, and that was written to be reparations for black folk in 1971. And George Bush Jr., I guess, Jeb Bush just killed it off about 6 months ago. But what's happening now is that what I'm trying to do is create a Harvest Institute that would try to take all my colleagues here and as much as possible try to give you new points of information to take you outside the box. Part of the problem we got in trying to deal with reparations, a lot of the other racial issues in the country, is that we keep trying to think and find solutions inside the box. There are no solutions inside the box for black folk. You got to get outside and try to find and get a long-term perspective and a long view on it. And that's what the Harvest Institute is in existence for, and that's what they're going to stay in existence for. Now, the reason you cannot win, as I said, is that you've been locked into this low level of a real-life monopoly game. You do not own and control enough of wealth. See, in 1860, for instance, black folk, as a direct result of slavery, had an ownership. When you were 98% slaves, you had an ownership of 1/2% of this nation's wealth in 1860 on the eve of the Civil War. Now, this is the richest country in the world, the most capitalistic country in the world. And here you are 140 years after slavery when you're supposedly 100% free and you still only have 1/2% of this nation's wealth. You cannot compete. The typical average white person in America has 3,500 times more money than you have. And that's not true only of blacks in America, it's true of the world internationally. What's happening right now is blacks is a marginalized, subordinated class of people all over the earth. You have 1/2% of wealth in this nation. The same thing is true all over the world. In the world, there's approximately $392 trillion worth of wealth on the earth. And black folk around the world have less than 1% ownership of it. That includes all the African countries. That includes Brazil, Caribbean, and America. You don't own enough control of anything. Whites control almost 100% of all the wealth, power, resources, privileges, and controls of all levels of government. You're playing a game you can't win. You got to get reparations. Now, how are you going to get it? Let me run through 3 or 4 things very quickly because I don't want to take up the time here. First thing you must do, I've heard it mentioned already, we got to commit a national campaign all over this country to start publicizing the issue of reparations for black folk. Not as something nice, but as a necessity, period. That means every living soul, every organization, every institution in this country must begin to start promoting reparations for black folk all over this country. That's level 1, is a massive, massive promotion of reparations for black folk. Second level, level 2, what we must do at second level 2 now is to start having facts-finding hearings. You must have facts-finding hearings all over this country. And you're going to have facts-finding hearings on at least 2 different levels. One is you're going to go after facts-finding about what roles governments have played in the reparations, in the slavery trade against black folk, and enslavement of black folk, the marginalization of black folk. And that should break down into 2 levels. One is to investigate all levels of domestic governments, that's city, county, federal, and state governments. And the second group would go after the international. So you should have 2 groups of black folk in this country exploring and fact-finding on what roles government have played, one domestically and one internationally. On the left-hand side, you should be doing the same thing for the domestic side. You should be going after the private sector. You should be going after all the private corporations in the United States, what roles they played and how they benefited directly from slavery. And also, on the same side, you must go after all the international corporations and the roles they played and how they benefited. Now, the Harvest Institute right now, my think tank, we've already picked up one. We put out a press release on that. We're going after domestic role that major corporations played in the United States. We've already identified approximately 240 companies that are still in existence that profiteer directly and enrich themselves off of black folk. We're going after that. And what we have to do in our fact finding is be able to factuate, document. There are direct line between how blacks have been crippled all the way up to economically, politically, socially, and educationally, and tied into these major corporations or tied into levels of government. That's your level 2. Level 3, you must then start having a national convention in this country. And right now, I think Dorothy Tillman in Chicago we talked about this. She's going to try to call one in Chicago this coming year. We must have everybody who's playing a role, like Congressman Conyers and everybody from the Congress and Cobra, everybody should be at a national convention where we all come in there to not only energize each other, but to share information, see where we are. They're trying to set it up for this coming February, someplace in the United States, possibly Chicago. That's your 3rd level. The 4th level you should start doing is trying to get into out of this conference should come strategies and plans and a specific role model. You got to have a model that every black can tie into. A model for reparations. Now, my model's a little different from everyone else's, and that's because I'm outside the box. I'm going to try to pull everybody else outside if I can get them. Now, most people are going to try to follow the Jewish reparations model or the Japanese model. I'm following the Indian model. The Indians are the most appropriate model if you want to track down, do anything to get reparations of black folk. Why? Because you see, only American Indians and black folk were spelled out in the Constitution. The Indians on reservations and black folk. There's a direct lineage between those 2 groups. And if you really want to track and get reparations, the easiest and quickest way is to go find out what happened to American Indians, what benefits they got, and track it. In my new book called Power Numbers, it takes you through every one of those steps. You can follow it. If you pick that up, you can come right to reparations very quickly because it'll be very difficult for the government to deny black folk for the same thing they're giving the Indians. So when you hear people talking about how bad off Indians are, first thing you say, fine, if Indians that bad off, put us as black folk in the same status with the Indians. We'll take that. Because see, right, what Indians got, See, first of all, nobody declared Indians to be a nation. Indians declared themselves to be a nation. They declared themselves to be a nation all the way up to about 1832 when Supreme Court Justice Marshall said, okay, I'll recognize you as a nation. We never declared ourselves to be a nation. We've always tried to do just the opposite of what the Indians did. Once they became a nation, they drew up a constitution for themselves. We never had a constitution. And what the Indians did with that constitution is then to go to the United States government and say, we do not want to integrate. We did just the opposite. We integrated. And I can track everything right down, or we can follow the Indian model if you want to. And you can see, and all that's already built into the law, and there's a direct lineage between American Indians and black folk that you can follow very easily and get to reparations. But we need to have a model. And in my new book, I get that model to be on the stand in about another month. You get the Powernomics model that take you through all those steps of what they did throughout history, from the Blair Amendments and everything else. You can track them very easily, and it'd be very difficult for the United States government to deny you reparations when you only two people that have a constitutional relationship with this government is black folk and Indians. Just like Indians use what they call natural rights and lay a claim against the land, we should use natural law and lay a claim against our labor, misappropriated labor. The next level what you must do is move to a legal step. You need to form at the fourth level, get you a legal body right now, whether it's going to be pro bono or paid. And out of our convention, we should be able to raise some funds to set up a mass legal body that'll be ready to start serving suits based on those facts that you're going to find at the second level. And we start to find those, then we should have people going after suits. One side suing the different levels of government, other side suing the private sector to get reparation funds for black folk. Then at the last level, you need to set up, at the sixth level, you need to set up some kind of a pool, or resource, or retrieval agency that every time we get some benefits, we're going to a special fund that will be held for pooling and aggregating. Now, then out of that special agency, we break away into two groups, what I would recommend. One, you would have an economic development bank on the East Coast and an economic development bank on the West Coast. And what those banks would do is take most of the money you get and not give it to black folk as individuals. You put it into a massive bank where black folk can go draw that money to start low interest, get low interest loans or free monies to build businesses and industries throughout the United States. You also, if you track the Indians, you should try to get yourself some tax-free, tax-exempt land. Just like Indians can go grab any piece of land and federalize and put up a casino, you tell me you want to do the same thing as a black person, get tax-exempt statuses. We can go on and on. Well, there's a lot of things we can track. Go after the Indians. But the thing that's most important, I'm going to quit, is that you got to understand that reparations are an absolute necessity. We're going to get buried alive. We do not have enough to be able to compete in this society. And the further we get away from the civil rights movement, the worse things are going to get. And when people start talking about slavery, don't just talk about slavery. Talk about Jim Crow slavery and benign neglect. You got to understand what slavery was. Slavery is the illegitimate child of racism. Racism still exists. That's slavery. Because what racism does, racism keeps and maintains what was created by slavery. Now, racism is a competitive economic struggle between groups of people for power and wealth. And it's slavery, and racism never existed until the 16th century. And when slavery went out of existence, racism took over. Racism has gone from meaning slavery to being something biological. Then it moved on in about the 1800s. It turns to be something as a personal behavior or an attitude, and now a bias and a prejudice. Racism has nothing to do with attitudes, with prejudice, and with bias. Racism is a competitive group contest between people for race, resources, and for superiority. And racism is a race without a finish line. I thank you very much.
That particular time, Europe was being decimated. Europe was under major problems. The entire European continent was being decimated with crime, famine, and diseases. They didn't know what to do in the late 1400s and early 1500s. And all of a sudden they said, since Pope Innocent says that we got some people we can use now as slaves, and we got
Take your time, brother. Yeah, we got time.
So when Columbus discovered America, he had all this land. Pope Innocent said, use these people. Let's have a new form of slavery. No longer based on religion, personal indebtedness, or prisoner of war. Let's use on skin color. And so by the 1500s, we can use that and save America. So a race started. A race is a contest. Mm-hmm. That contest started between 9 European nations. Portugal, they all said, let's get in the contest so we can go to the Americas first and capture all that land and build wealth. That's what they came here for. Mm-hmm. Now, you all get by that stuff about they believe in about the Constitution, but they came here for religious persecution. Nobody came here for no damn religious persecution. They came here for happiness. Nobody can get on a damn boat and sail across the Atlantic coming to America for happiness. Then that's stupid. They came here for enrichment.
every tourist immigrant came to America. They came here for personal enrichment. That's what they came here to get values, resources. And they started bringing people. So all these countries were competing to try to capture Americas and build it up for enrichment. And that's what happened with Americans. When they got to America and later on, let me jump up. Now, they said, well, we got all this land now. We got these people. Let's draw the Constitution. That's what. So as I told you a few minutes ago, they met in Philadelphia. Says, let's take all this land. We're going to create a document called the U.S. Constitution. That was in 1789. We're going to ratify this, and we ratify it. It's going to be a social construct that the bro here just mentioned to you. The construct is that how are we going to do that? It's well at the top. Let's all the Europeans that got money want to invest in the United States. They got rich people. Then that'll be the top scale. They can come here and get all the land. That's Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, all those guys, and Thomas Jefferson. They were wealthy people. They said underneath that, that's the top level. Underneath that, we set up a management class to bring in poor whites. They'd be the management class. And at the bottom, we're going to bring in these blacks to have to be managed and classify them as property, as non-citizens. That way they'll never get anything. We got them locked in box. That's in the Constitution. And that's how they got you. The first thing they did the next year in 1991, they passed the first immigration laws. Says, let's bring in all these poor people. This is a nation, an immigrant nation. It's basically for whites only. And black folk, you are not citizens. You have no entitlements, no rights, and no privileges, and nothing. Everything we put into the hands of the dominant white society.
Why is it expected for black?
They said, we'll let blacks have their churches, but we can always also, but we must pick the ministers, and we must license the ministers. We must pick ministers that we can control. No black preacher can come into America unless he is controlled by the white establishment, unless he represents our interests and our values, unless he teaches our form of Christianity. Now, this is very important. Why? Because, you see, before, religion was always used to help a population group. When it comes to blacks, we cannot let religion be used to help them. You see, the Catholics, church took care of all those groups who call themselves Catholics. Jews, priests, took care of the Jews. And even today, you go into the conflicts in England or Ireland, where you see the Protestants and the Catholics fighting. I guarantee you that the Protestant members will be representing their people and protecting them. Only in America can I find black ministers who can be bought and sold to be against their own people. Nobody else will let you do that. No population will tolerate that except our people. And that's what I call inappropriate behavior. Inappropriate behavior pattern when you let your own ministers sell you out. It's not in your best interest. What I mean by sell you out is because by the early 1800s, the whites said, well, we're going to have black ministers. We're going to have to Christian them to make sure they do what we want to have done. They must teach Christianity the way we want it taught, to where it is an external control device on black folk. They said, what are the rules? One, that every minister we license must teach black folk. And when you talk about the slave and the master in the Bible, that you're talking about the white man and the black man on earth. Two, you must teach the minister must teach black folk that they're to be loyal, faithful, obedient, respectful, and all those other good things, and honest, so that white people don't have to worry about them stealing as a slave. Because, you know, black slaves had a nasty habit of going around stealing scraps of food because they were starving to death. And they would tell them they must be industrious. But you see, white folks wanted you to work a little harder. So they used the term, he's a lazy slave. Now, anybody in his right mind got more than a third-grade education would say, why would a slave want to be industrial? Why would you want to work hard as a slave?
What's in it for you? Are you going to get released early? You can get a pension? Social Security or retirement? But they always got this thing about, why, he's a lazy slave. I even got a black writer writes about that day. Part of the problem is the blacks were lazy slaves. He should have been lazy. The third thing they put on you is that, well, the black ministers must also teach them to get pie in the sky after death. They're going to turn their world upside down. So while everybody else is competing to get resources, to get wealth, to get power, black folk are saying, I'm waiting for mine in the sky.
Understanding real history.
Very profound happened, Daryl, that every black person in this country needs to understand. Something very, very profound. What happened in 1638? The Maryland colony put out its first public edict. And what that edict said is that black folks shall never enjoy the fruits of white society. That is very key to what's been happening to you for 400 years.
And that is written and established in American code.
That's right.
Codified as law.
That's right. And so, and between that point, let's say about the next 20 years, for instance, the European colonies were putting pressure on this country, saying, hey, we didn't send you to America to have a good time, just enjoy yourself and sit back and relax. We sent you to relax. We sent you to America to produce wealth, some resources for our European, continent. And most of the colonies were sending letters back saying, hey, we can't do anything in this country. We don't have the wherewithal. It would take us a lifetime to clear the forest, to move the bricks, to get rid of the snakes and rocks. And we need a labor force to do it. And at that point in time, the white society knew they had a need. So what happened, they brought together a very strong sense of community around that need and said, we got to find a way of resolving that problem. And they looked back at that public edict was put out in Maryland in 1638, which says black folks should never enjoy the fruits of white society, and they expanded it. Right. So by 1664, 1665, every colony in the United States enacted a slave law that says black folks shall now constitute a subordinated, excluded, uncompensated, non-competitive, managed workforce for the personal comfort and wealth building of white society. And that became your public policy that remained in existence up until recent times.
Why isn't that taught in public education now? Why don't we know that?
Understanding real history.
Very profound happened, Daryl, that every black person in this country needs to understand. Something very, very profound. What happened in 1638? The Maryland colony put out its first public edict. And what that edict said is that black folks shall never enjoy the fruits of white society. That is very key to what's been happening to you for 400 years.
And that is written and established in American code.
That's right.
Codified as law.
That's right. And so, and between that point, let's say about the next 20 years, for instance, the European colonies were putting pressure on this country, saying, hey, we didn't send you to America to have a good time, just enjoy yourself and sit back and relax. We sent you to relax. We sent you to America to produce wealth, some resources for our European, continent. And most of the colonies were sending letters back saying, hey, we can't do anything in this country. We don't have the wherewithal. It would take us a lifetime to clear the forest, to move the bricks, to get rid of the snakes and rocks. And we need a labor force to do it. And at that point in time, the white society knew they had a need. So what happened, they brought together a very strong sense of community around that need and said, we got to find a way of resolving that problem. And they looked back at that public edict was put out in Maryland in 1638, which says black folks should never enjoy the fruits of white society, and they expanded it. Right. So by 1664, 1665, every colony in the United States enacted a slave law that says black folks shall now constitute a subordinated, excluded, uncompensated, non-competitive, managed workforce for the personal comfort and wealth building of white society. And that became your public policy that remained in existence up until recent times.
Why isn't that taught in public education now? Why don't we know that?
Because what happened immediately after that, all the institutions jumped in and all the nations of this country jumped in to justify slavery, enslaving the black folk. And so the religious institutions said, well, we have to base it on something. So they said, let's base it on Bible, on biblical principles. Saying the Bible that the blacks were offshoot of Ham, so therefore God had decreed that black folks should be enslaved. And that stayed in effect for about maybe a couple of hundred years, about 100 and some years, and all of a sudden they moved over to the biological and said, well, blacks are just basically biologically inferior.
So from
And
one
that's what the
rung-
bell curve is telling you about now.
And the bell curve, of course, is the controversial book assaulting black intelligence as genetically inferior.
That's right.
As the author alleges.
That's right.
Is the case.
That's an extension of the original public policy that was put into place back in the 16th century.
As an extension of that public policy, I think the key here is public policy. What you've talked about and outlined in very brief